I'm Natalie Wilson, 28, an elementary school teacher with a complicated relationship with my sister Kimberly. We've never been close. But nothing prepared me for her humiliation at her own engagement party. Just as tears threatened to fall, her fiancé Jason stood up, expression frozen in disbelief, and said 5 words that changed everything. You're the judge. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're viewing from, hit that like and subscribe button. And stay for a story about finding your worth when family tries to steal it. Growing up in a leafy Boston suburb, my childhood looked picture perfect from the outside. Our 4-bedroom colonial with the wraparound porch housed what seemed like the ideal American family: hardworking father in finance, dedicated mother who balanced part-time legal work with homemaking, and 2 daughters just 4 years apart. But inside those walls, a constant comparison game played out that would shape both our lives. From the beginning, Kimberly was the golden child. For years my senior at 32 now, she walked early, talked early, and seemed to absorb knowledge effortlessly. By kindergarten, she was already reading chapter books while I struggled to recognize simple words. Our parents never hid their expectations. Excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was required. Look at your sister's report card, my father would say, waving Kimberly straight A's while my paper with C's and D's sat crumpled in my backpack. Why can't you apply yourself like Kimberly? What none of us knew then was that I was battling an undiagnosed learning disability. Words jumbled on pages, letters flipped and floated, and no amount of staring made them behave. While Kimberly effortlessly earned academic accolades, I earned concerned teacher notes and disappointed parental sighs. It wasn't just academics. Kimberly excelled at everything she touched. She played violin in the youth orchestra, captained the debate team, and ran track with the grace of a gazelle. Meanwhile, I struggled through music lessons that ended in frustration, and sports attempts that resulted in embarrassment. Maybe you're just not trying hard enough, my mother would suggest gently, though the implication stung just as much as my father's direct comparisons. The summer I turned 10, I discovered my first real joy. The neighbor's children, twins aged 5, were struggling with loneliness during their school break. Their harried mother gratefully accepted my offer to entertain them with art projects. Something magical happened as I taught them to make papier-mâché animals and watercolor landscapes. Their eyes lit up with understanding, and for once I wasn't the slowest learner in the room. Natalie has such a way with the Henderson twins, our neighbor told my mother over coffee one afternoon. She explains things so they understand immediately. She's got a real gift. My mother smiled politely but later asked why I was wasting time with finger paints when I should be preparing for middle school pre-algebra. Kimberly, meanwhile, never missed an opportunity to highlight my shortcomings. When I misread a restaurant menu and ordered something I hated, she'd laugh and tell the story at the next family gathering. When I struggled with homework, she'd sigh dramatically and correct me with exaggerated patience, making sure our parents witnessed her helping her slow sister. "It's okay, Natalie," she'd say with a saccharine smile. "Not everyone can be good at school stuff. Maybe you'll be pretty." Even that backhanded consolation wasn't true. While Kimberly blossomed into a willowy blonde with our mother's elegant features, I remained awkwardly stuck between growth spurts, with unruly brown hair that refused to behave and our father's stronger jawline. The constant comparisons built a foundation of insecurity that followed me everywhere. I learned to speak less in group settings, afraid of saying something wrong. I avoided bringing friends home, embarrassed by how clearly our parents favored my sister. I developed a habit of apologizing for my existence, often starting sentences with "sorry but," even when asking for basic necessities. By the time I reached middle school, the pattern was firmly established. Kimberly would shine, our parents would beam, and I would try to make myself as small as possible to avoid being the family disappointment. But despite it all, those afternoons teaching neighborhood children became my secret sanctuary. In those moments, patiently guiding small hands through creative projects, I found the first hints of what would eventually become my calling and salvation. High school only widened the gap between Kimberly and me. While I struggled through freshman year, she was preparing for graduation as the class valedictorian. The entire town seemed to know Kimberly Wilson. With her perfect GPA and college acceptance letters from schools our parents boasted about at every opportunity. Harvard, Yale, and Princeton all offered scholarships. My father announced at his office Christmas party, loud enough for everyone to hear, When someone asked about his younger daughter, he vaguely mentioned I was still finding my way. Junior year brought a pivotal moment when my English teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, noticed my pattern of excellent verbal contributions but failing written assignments. She suggested testing, which finally put a name to my lifelong struggle, dyslexia. I wasn't lazy or stupid. My brain simply processed written information differently. I rushed home with the evaluation, a mix of relief and vindication washing over me. Finally, an explanation that wasn't "you're not trying hard enough." Dyslexia, my mother frowned, scanning the paperwork. That seems convenient. Kimberly never needed any special accommodations. My father was equally dismissive. These learning disability labels are just excuses for not putting in the work. When I was in school, we just buckled down and studied harder. Even with my diagnosis, their expectations didn't change. Kimberly had set the bar, and my neurological differences weren't considered a valid reason for not reaching it. The one bright spot came during my senior year career day. A kindergarten teacher spoke about early childhood education, and something clicked inside me. Working with young children had always been my sanctuary. What if I could make it my profession? When I announced my intention to pursue an education degree, my parents couldn't hide their disappointment. Teaching? My mother sighed. It's a respectable work, of course, but with the Wilson name you could aim higher. Law, medicine, finance, those are careers with real potential. Meanwhile, Kimberly was thriving at Cornell, double majoring in business and economics. Her social media showcased an enviable college experience, prestigious internships, study abroad in London, and a wide circle of equally accomplished friends. Each holiday break, she returned with new stories of success that dominated family conversations. I chose the State University's education program, partly because of their excellent special education resources and partly because it was what we could afford after Kimberly's Ivy League expenses. There, away from my sister's shadow, I began to flourish. Professors praised my intuitive understanding of different learning styles. Classroom observations earned me commendations from supervising teachers. For the first time, I felt competent, even talented. By the time I graduated with honors in elementary education, Kimberly had already completed her MBA and secured a junior executive position at a prestigious financial firm in New York. Her starting salary was more than I could hope to make after a decade of teaching. "Couldn't you at least consider private school?" my father suggested. "The pay is better, and the connections could open doors." But I had fallen in love with public education during my student teaching at Franklin Elementary, where diverse students from various backgrounds and abilities needed dedicated teachers. I accepted a position teaching second grade there, in the same district where I had once been the struggling student. Family gatherings became increasingly tense affairs. Thanksgiving conversations centered around Kimberly's rapid promotion track and luxury Manhattan apartment. When I mentioned developing a new reading program for struggling students, my mother patted my hand and quickly redirected the conversation. "That's nice, dear. Did everyone hear that Kimberly's firm is sending her to Tokyo for the International Banking Conference?" Christmas gift exchanges highlighted the growing financial disparity. Kimberly gave designer items with price tags that represented half my monthly salary, while I carefully crafted personalized gifts that were politely acknowledged then set aside. Despite it all, I tried maintaining a relationship with my sister. I called regularly, sent thoughtful cards for milestones, and genuinely celebrated her achievements. But our conversations increasingly felt like interviews where I was the audience for her success story, my own life experiences barely warranting a cursory "How's the teaching going?" before she returned to her narrative. "You should come visit me in New York," she'd occasionally say. Though the invitations never materialized into concrete plans. "I could introduce you to some people. Maybe help you find a career with actual growth potential." The subtle digs were constant, her way of reinforcing the hierarchy that had defined our childhood. Teaching wasn't just a different career path in Kimberly's eyes, it was a lesser one. A fallback for those who couldn't compete in the real world she inhabited. By our late 20s, we were living entirely different lives. Kimberly's world of corporate high-rises, international business trips, and networking events couldn't have been further from my classroom of finger paint, reading circles, and breakthrough moments with struggling students. The distance between Boston and New York was nothing compared to the gulf in our life experiences and values. Yet family ties kept pulling us back into each other's orbits for holidays, parents' anniversaries, and occasional Sunday dinners when Kimberly was in town for business. Each interaction left me emotionally drained, reawakening the insecurities I worked so hard to overcome in my daily life. Until Kimberly met Jason and everything unexpectedly began to change. 2 years ago, our family Thanksgiving dinner introduced a new face to the table. Kimberly arrived fashionably late, as usual, but this time with a tall, dark-haired man in tow. Jason Reynolds, her latest boyfriend, had the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need announcement. While Kimberly made their entrance all about her new Louboutins in recent promotion, Jason quietly helped my mother carry dishes to the table and complimented my father's whiskey selection with genuine interest. "So you're the teacher in the family," Jason said when we were finally introduced, his handshake firm and warm. "Kimberly mentioned you work with young kids." I was surprised Kimberly had mentioned me at all. "Second grade at Franklin Elementary," I confirmed, waiting for the polite nod and subject change that usually followed disclosure of my profession. Instead, Jason's face lit up. "No kidding? My sister Rachel teaches third grade in Chicago. She says it's the hardest job she's ever loved." Before I could respond, Kimberly slipped her arm through Jason's. "Jason's an architect," she announced to the table. "He just finished designing that new glass tower on the Boston waterfront, the one that was featured in Architectural Digest." Jason smiled modestly. "It was a team effort, but yes, that project turned out well." Throughout dinner, I noticed something odd. Whenever education came up in conversation, Jason engaged thoughtfully rather than dismissively. When my father made his usual comment about teachers having cushy hours and summers off, Jason respectfully countered with statistics about how much time teachers actually work beyond school hours. "My sister logs about 60 hours weekly when you count preparation, grading, and parent communications," he noted. "And she spends most of her summer taking continuing education courses and preparing for the next year." Kimberly looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Jason's firm is bidding on the new Performing Arts Center project," she interjected. "Tell them about the innovative acoustic design, honey." But later, as I cleared dessert plates, Jason appeared beside me with a stack of dirty dishes. "Kimberly mentioned you struggled in school," he said quietly. "My sister Rachel has dyslexia too. Wasn't diagnosed until college. Changed her life to finally understand why reading had always been so difficult." I nearly dropped the plates in shock. Not because Jason knew about my dyslexia, but because Kimberly had discussed it without framing it as a personal failure. It made a huge difference for me too, I admitted, especially in how I approach teaching kids who learn differently. Rachel says the same thing. She believes it makes her a more empathetic teacher. His genuine interest was disarming. "What strategies have you found work best for kids who process text differently?" For the next 15 minutes, Jason and I discussed multisensory learning approaches while washing dishes together. It was the most engaging conversation I'd had at a family gathering in years. Kimberly appeared in the doorway twice, looking increasingly annoyed at finding us deep in conversation. "Jason, my father wants to show you his vintage car collection," she finally interrupted, practically pulling him from the kitchen. As the evening wound down, Jason mentioned he served on the board of a small foundation supporting educational initiatives. "We're always looking for input from teachers in the trenches," he said, handing me his business card. "If you ever have ideas about programs that could help kids with learning differences, I'd love to hear them." Kimberly's smile tightened as she practically dragged him toward the door. Over the next several months, Jason became a regular presence at family events. Unlike Kimberly's previous boyfriends, slick finance types who mirrored her ambition and materialism, Jason seemed grounded in different values. He was undeniably successful in his field, but he measured achievement beyond money and status. During a 4th of July barbecue, I overheard Jason and my father discussing career satisfaction. "Of course, the financial rewards are important," Jason acknowledged, "but at the end of the day, I want to create spaces that improve people's lives. A well-designed school can actually improve learning outcomes. That matters more than another luxury condo tower." My father seemed perplexed by this perspective but impressed enough by Jason's obvious success to nod along. Later that same afternoon, Jason sought me out while Kimberly was busy showing our mother her new diamond tennis bracelet. "I meant to tell you, I visited a school in Finland last month that's doing amazing things with flexible learning spaces for kids with different processing styles. Made me think of your classroom. He pulled up photos on his phone, and we spent 20 minutes discussing how physical environments impact learning. When Kimberly finally noticed our animated conversation, she swooped in immediately. Boring my boyfriend with teacher talk? She asked with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Jason, come meet the Hendersons. They just bought a vacation home in the same Hamptons community as my boss. As she led him away, Jason glanced back apologetically. I was beginning to notice a pattern. He seemed genuinely interested in my work and ideas, while Kimberly consistently steered him away from these interactions. Over time, Jason and I developed a friendly rapport despite Kimberly's obvious discomfort. He would email me articles about education innovation or text occasional questions about teaching approaches. Each time I saw him at family gatherings, he made a point to ask about my students and share updates about his sister Rachel's classroom experiences. Once, when Kimberly was out of earshot, he confided, "My parents were a lot like yours. Success was measured in prestige and income. It took years for them to accept that Rachel's work as a teacher was valuable. Now they're her biggest supporters. What changed their minds?" I asked, trying to imagine my parents ever taking such pride in my career. "They saw her in action," he said simply. "Watched her connect with kids who were struggling, saw the difference she made. Some things you have to witness to understand." The conversation ended abruptly when Kimberly returned, but Jason's words stayed with me. They offered a glimmer of hope that perhaps someday my family might see value in my chosen path. What became increasingly clear, however, was Kimberly's growing jealousy of my connection with Jason. She began making more pointed remarks about my career when he was present. Natalie was showing me pictures of her classroom. My mother mentioned during one dinner finger paintings and alphabet charts. Kimberly laughed. Meanwhile, I'm presenting market analysis to the board of directors tomorrow. I expected Jason to laugh along politely as everyone usually did at Kimberly's jabs. Instead, he looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. Later, he found me alone on the porch. "Your sister doesn't always recognize how her words come across," he said carefully. "It's fine. I'm used to it." "That's the problem," he replied, his expression troubled. No one should be used to being diminished. His comment left me wondering what he saw in my sister, whose habit of building herself up by tearing others down seemed increasingly obvious. But I kept these thoughts to myself, not wanting to complicate their relationship or my already strained connection with Kimberly. What I didn't realize then was how closely Jason was observing the dynamics of our family, and how much those observations would eventually matter. The engagement announcement came via group text on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was helping my students with their science projects. A close-up photo of Kimberly's perfectly manicured hand sporting an enormous diamond ring, captioned simply, I said yes. My phone immediately exploded with separate texts from my mother. "Isn't it wonderful? 3 carats, platinum setting, and call your sister to congratulate her, and we're thinking June wedding at the Bellingham estate." Despite our complicated relationship, I felt genuinely happy for Kimberly. Jason seemed like a stabilizing influence in her life, someone who valued substance over status. Maybe marriage would soften some of her sharper edges. I called that evening and listened to Kimberly detail every moment of Jason's elaborate proposal. A private helicopter tour over Boston Harbor, landing on the rooftop of his architectural firm's building where he'd arranged a candlelit dinner, dropping to one knee as the sun set. "It was absolute perfection," she gushed. "The ring was exactly what I wanted. He worked with a custom jeweler for months." When she finally paused for breath, I offered sincere congratulations. "Thanks," she replied, and then added something unexpected. "Actually, I was hoping you'd be my maid of honor." The request stunned me into momentary silence. Throughout our adult lives, Kimberly had made it clear that her sophisticated New York friends were her inner circle. I'd always assumed I'd be lucky to make the bridesmaid list, let alone hold the premier position. "Are you sure?" I finally managed. "What about Madison or Taylor?" I named her 2 closest friends from business school who feature prominently in her social media posts. "Don't be silly," Kimberly dismissed. "You're my sister. It's traditional." There was something rehearsed about her response, as though she prepared for my surprise. Later that night, my phone pinged with a text from Jason. "Heard the good news is out. Hope you're okay with all this wedding excitement heading your way. Kay really wants you involved. His message suggested he'd encouraged Kimberly's decision, which made more sense than her suddenly prioritizing our sisterhood. Still, I allowed myself to hope this might represent a turning point in our relationship. Perhaps the engagement had prompted Kimberly to reconsider life's priorities. This optimism lasted approximately 2 weeks. The engagement party planning revealed Kimberly hadn't changed at all. Our mother created a group chat for coordinating details, and Kimberly dominated it with increasingly extravagant demands. When I suggested a meaningful toast that highlighted their journey as a couple, she responded, "Let's leave the sentimental stuff to people who can express themselves properly. No offense, but you know how you get when you're nervous. Just something short and sweet from you would be perfect." When I shared ideas for a simple navy blue dress as maid of honor, she immediately shut me down. "Absolutely not navy. It washes you out completely. I've already chosen a blush pink for you. It's not your best color either, but it matches my aesthetic." Every suggestion I offered was dismissed. Every question I asked was answered with condescension. It became clear that maid of honor was merely a title. My actual role was to follow instructions and stay in the background. Meanwhile, I was learning more about Jason that made me question what he saw in my sister. Through casual conversations and social media, I discovered his foundation primarily funded programs for children with learning disabilities. He regularly volunteered teaching architecture basics to middle schoolers in underserved communities. His firm had a policy of designing one pro bono public school or library project for every 3 commercial projects they completed. These values seemed fundamentally misaligned with Kimberly's relentless focus on status and material success. I wondered if she supported these aspects of his life or simply tolerated them as quirks to be managed. My answer came 3 weeks before the engagement party. When I stopped by my parents' house unexpectedly, Kimberly was visiting from New York, and I overheard her talking to her bridesmaids in the sunroom. "Jason's obsession with these charity cases is exhausting," she was saying. "Last week it was some special reading program for dyslexic kids. Like, I get it, his sister had learning issues. But does every conversation have to circle back to education?" The familiar dismissive tone when discussing learning disabilities made my stomach clench. She continued, "And he keeps trying to involve Natalie in these discussions because, she teaches or whatever. It's like, hello. We get it. My sister couldn't cut it in a real career, so she's playing with finger paints and ABCs all day." Laughter followed, and another voice added, "At least she'll be easy to manage as maid of honor. She's always been desperate for your approval." "True," Kimberly agreed. "Just have to make sure she doesn't embarrass me at the wedding. You know how awkward she gets in social situations." I backed away silently, my earlier hope shattered. Nothing had changed. The maid of honor role wasn't about sisterly bonding, it was about control and appearances. I seriously considered declining the role and skipping the engagement party altogether. But something kept me from making that call. Perhaps it was lingering hope that Kimberly might yet reveal a better side of herself. Or maybe it was concern for Jason, who seemed genuinely unaware of how his fiancé spoke about the causes and people he cared about when he wasn't present. As the engagement party approached, I prepared my toast with care, determined to be gracious despite everything. I bought the blush pink dress Kimberly demanded, spent money I couldn't really spare on the hairstylist she insisted I use, and practiced a brief, positive speech that wouldn't give her any ammunition for criticism. The night before the party, I received an unexpected call from Jason. "Just checking in," he said. "Kimberly mentioned you seemed stressed about tomorrow." What Kimberly had actually said was that I was being dramatic as usual about my toast responsibilities. But I appreciated Jason's diplomatic framing. "I'm a little nervous," I admitted. "Public speaking isn't my strongest skill." "You teach 32nd graders every day," he pointed out. "That's a tougher audience than any roomful of adults." His encouragement was genuine, but something in his tone suggested tension. After a moment's hesitation, he added, "Natalie, no matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know I've really valued getting to know you over these past 2 years. You're an exceptional person." The comment felt oddly weighted, almost like a preemptive apology, but for what, I couldn't imagine. "Thanks, Jason. That means a lot." As I hung up, a sense of unease settled over me. Something about tomorrow's event felt precarious, as though we were all balanced on the edge of a significant shift. I just couldn't predict which way we would fall. The grand ballroom of the Hawthorne Hotel glittered with champagne flutes and flickering candles when I arrived for the engagement party. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, white roses and pink peonies, Kimberly's chosen aesthetic. A string quartet played in the corner, and waitstaff circulated with trays of appetizers too artful to actually eat. I smoothed the skirt of my blush pink dress, a shade that did indeed wash out my complexion as I'd feared, and fought against the immediate feeling of inadequacy that engulfed me. The room was filled with Kimberly's glamorous friends, my parents' country club circle, and Jason's colleagues from the architectural world. Everyone looked effortlessly elegant in a way I could never quite master. "Natalie, you made it." Kimberly air-kissed near both my cheeks, careful not to actually make contact. Her white designer dress was architectural in its precision. Her blonde hair swept into a complicated updo that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Let me introduce you to everyone as my maid of honor." What followed was a whirlwind tour of introductions where Kimberly managed to slip subtle digs into each one. "This is my sister Natalie. She teaches elementary school. Isn't that sweet?" Or "Natalie's always been the creative one, not ambitious like me, but so good with children." Each introduction reinforced our prescribed roles. Kimberly the successful achiever, me the underachieving but well-meaning younger sister. I smiled through it all, reminding myself this night wasn't about me. Jason found me at the bar as I was ordering a much-needed glass of wine. "You look nice," he said, his kind eyes contradicting the strain evident in his smile. "Holding up okay?" "Just practicing my toast and trying not to spill anything on this dress," I replied lightly. "About the toast?" He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "Kimberly's been a bit anxious about it. Maybe stick to the approved talking points?" The fact that there were approved talking points for a maid of honor toast was so typically Kimberly that I almost laughed. "Don't worry. I won't embarrass anyone." Jason looked like he wanted to say more, but Kimberly appeared at his elbow. "Darling, my father wants to introduce you to his golf partners. Investment opportunities." She flashed me a tight smile. "Toast in 20 minutes, Natalie. Remember, short and sweet." The dinner portion of the evening proceeded with predictable precision. My parents beamed with pride during their welcome speech, focusing primarily on Kimberly's accomplishments while mentioning Jason's credentials as though reading from his LinkedIn profile. Several of Kimberly's friends offered glowing anecdotes about the couple, carefully curated to present their relationship as aspirational and Instagram perfect. Finally, the moment arrived for the maid of honor toast. My palms sweated as I rose and tapped my glass gently. For those who don't know me, I'm Natalie, Kimberly's sister. My voice was steadier than I felt. While growing up with Kimberly wasn't always easy, she set the bar incredibly high in everything she did. Watching her find happiness with Jason has been truly wonderful. I turned toward the couple, focusing on their faces. "Jason, you've brought out sides of my sister I'd almost forgotten existed. Her laugh, her spontaneity, her capacity for seeing beyond herself. And Kimberly, you've found someone who appreciates both your strength and your vulnerability, who challenges you to be your best self." I raised my glass. "To Kimberly and Jason, may your life together be built on understanding, growth, and genuine partnership. I wish you both all the happiness in the world." It was brief, sincere, and entirely inoffensive. Exactly what had been requested. I sat down, relief washing over me as polite applause filled the room. Jason caught my eye and nodded appreciatively. But as the applause faded, Kimberly stood up, champagne glass in hand. "I think I need to respond to that lovely toast," she said, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness I recognized as dangerous territory. "My little sister has always been so earnest," she continued, placing emphasis on little in a way that diminished rather than endeared. "What she didn't mention is how she's always looked up to me, sometimes a bit too much, right, Natalie?" Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. My stomach tightened. I mean, growing up, Natalie followed me everywhere. Always wanting what I had, always trying to keep up. Kimberly's smile remained fixed, but her eyes had taken on a competitive gleam I knew all too well. Even now, she's constantly asking for career advice, fashion tips, dating help, though clearly. She gestured to my dress. "Some of those tips don't quite translate." More laughter, less nervous this time. I felt my cheeks burning but kept my expression neutral. This was typical Kimberly behavior, establishing dominance through subtle humiliation, but she rarely did it so publicly. What's adorable is how Natalie thinks teaching second grade qualifies her to give relationship advice. Kimberly laughed lightly, as if managing finger painting and ABCs prepares you for the real world of adult relationships. I glanced at Jason, whose smile had completely vanished. He was watching Kimberly with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between shock and disappointment. Remember that time in high school when you tried to help me with my college applications, Nat? Kimberly continued, warming to her theme. You spelled achievement wrong on every single one. Thank God Mom caught it before I sent them. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet now, the audience sensing they were witnessing something inappropriate rather than the light-hearted ribbing Kimberly was attempting to frame it as. But that's our Natalie heart of gold, brain of. Well, let's just say reading hasn't always been her strong suit. She winked conspiratorially at the crowd. She tries so hard though. Always has, even when it's obvious she's out of her depth. I felt tears threatening and blinked rapidly, determined not to give her the satisfaction. My parents were looking down at their plates, neither intervening nor meeting my eyes. In fact, Kimberly was fully committed now, her filter completely abandoned. There's this hilarious story from when we were kids. Natalie had to read aloud in class and mixed up so many words that the entire story changed meaning. Something about a duck that wanted to be a truck? The whole class was laughing so hard the teacher had to stop the lesson. The memory hit like a physical blow. One of the most humiliating moments of my childhood, before my dyslexia was diagnosed, when I'd come home in tears and begged to never go back to school. Kimberly had promised never to tell anyone. Yet here she was, weaponizing it for a laugh at her own engagement party. The room had fallen completely silent. I stared at my hands, fighting the urge to flee. Then suddenly the scrape of a chair. Jason had stood up. His expression no longer unreadable but absolutely clear, cold fury. You're the judge, he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. Kimberly turned to him, momentarily confused. What, honey? You're the judge, Jason repeated, louder this time. You all are. He looked around the room, making deliberate eye contact with my parents, with Kimberly's friends, with everyone who had sat by comfortably during her speech. I've spent 2 years watching this dynamic play out. 2 years observing how a brilliant, compassionate educator is systematically belittled by her own family. 2 years wondering when anyone would stand up and say enough. My heart was pounding so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. Kimberly's smile had frozen, her eyes darting between Jason and the stunned guests. Jason, darling. I was just having a little fun. No, he cut her off firmly. You were publicly humiliating your sister for having a learning disability. A condition she's not only overcome but transformed into her greatest strength as an educator. The silence in the room was absolute now. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Could only watch as something momentous and terrible and necessary unfolded before me. Jason stood tall, addressing the entire stunned room with a calm, measured voice that somehow carried more impact than if he'd been shouting. I'd like everyone here to understand something clearly, he began. For the past 2 years, I've been witnessing a pattern of behavior that I initially tried to rationalize. I told myself it was just sibling rivalry, just family dynamics I didn't fully understand. But tonight has made it impossible to remain silent. Kimberly reached for his arm. Jason, this isn't the time or place. It's exactly the time and place, he replied, gently but firmly removing her hand. When else? After we're married? When this behavior has continued for decades more. He turned back to the guests. My sister Rachel has dyslexia. Growing up, she struggled with many of the same challenges Natalie faced. She was mocked by classmates, underestimated by teachers, and made to feel intellectually inferior. Today, she's one of the most effective educators I know, precisely because she understands learning differences from the inside. He glanced at me with genuine respect in his eyes. When I met Natalie and learned about her journey from struggling student to dedicated teacher, I was immediately impressed. Here was someone who had transformed her challenges into compassion and expertise. Someone who was making a profound difference in young lives every single day. My throat tightened with emotion. No one in my family had ever spoken about my career this way, with understanding of both its challenges and its value. Over time, Jason continued, I've come to admire Natalie's resilience. her innovative teaching methods, and her unwavering commitment to helping children who learn differently. I've shared research articles with her, discussed educational approaches, and learned more from our conversations than from many professional conferences I've attended. Kimberly's face had drained of color. She was looking frantically between Jason and the guests, trying to gauge how to regain control of the situation. What I've also observed, Jason's voice hardened slightly, is a persistent pattern of dismissal and derision toward both Natalie and the teaching profession as a whole. Comments suggesting that education is somehow less valuable than corporate work. Jokes about learning disabilities as though they reflect on a person's intelligence or worth. He turned directly to Kimberly. What you may not have realized, or perhaps didn't care about, is that my foundation's primary mission is supporting programs for children with learning differences. The charity cases you've complained about are children just like Natalie once was, just like my sister was, struggling in a system not designed for their minds. Gasps rippled through the audience. Kimberly's eyes widened in horror as she realized Jason had overheard conversations never meant for his ears. That's not fair, she attempted, her voice unnaturally high. You're taking things out of context. I was just joking around with the girls. The context is quite clear, Jason replied evenly. And it's consistent with behavior I've witnessed repeatedly, the subtle undermining comments at family gatherings, the eye-rolling when education is discussed. The constant reminders of childhood struggles that should have been left in the past. He looked around the room again. What concerns me almost as much is how everyone around Natalie has normalized this treatment. How many of you have laughed along with these jokes? How many have remained silent while someone's profession and personal challenges were mocked? My parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. My mother looked close to tears. Education isn't just a fallback career for those who couldn't cut it in business or law, Jason continued. It's a calling that shapes our future. Teachers like Natalie and my sister work longer hours for less recognition than almost any other profession, and they do it because they care deeply about making a difference. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that caught the light. The engagement ring. With deliberate movements, he placed it on the table. I can't build a life with someone who fundamentally misunderstands what I value, he said quietly. Someone who would mock her own sister for a neurological difference rather than admire her for overcoming it. Someone who measures worth by salary and status, rather than character and contribution. Kimberly stared at the ring in disbelief. You can't be serious, she whispered. Over a stupid toast? Jason, you're overreacting. This isn't about a toast, he replied. It's about a pattern that's become impossible to ignore. It's about fundamental values that don't align. Kimberly's shock quickly morphed into damage control. She forced a laugh. Addressing the room. I think we've all had a bit too much champagne. Jason and I will work this out privately. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. But Jason wasn't finished. I believe everyone here has a choice to make, he said. You can continue enabling behavior that diminishes dedicated educators and individuals with learning differences. Or you can reflect on how your silence has contributed to a culture where someone as exceptional as Natalie is made to feel inadequate. My parents finally found their voices. My father rising to his feet. Now see here, he began defensively. We've always supported both our daughters. Have you? Jason interrupted. Have you ever attended one of Natalie's classroom events with the same enthusiasm you've shown for Kimberly's corporate milestones? Have you ever spoken about her career with pride rather than apology? My mother's face crumpled as the truth of his words hit home. My father looked as though he'd been physically struck. In the silence that followed, I found my voice. Standing on shaky legs, I spoke clearly for the first time that evening. Jason's right, I said simply. For as long as I can remember. I've been made to feel that my learning difference was a personal failure, and my career choice was a disappointment. I've accepted it because I thought that's what families do. They establish roles and we play them, the golden child and the underachiever. I looked directly at Kimberly. I've celebrated every promotion, every achievement, every milestone in your life with genuine happiness for you. I can't remember the last time you showed even basic respect for my work or my accomplishments. My voice grew stronger. Teaching isn't what I do because I couldn't do anything else. It's what I choose to do because it matters. Because every day, I help children who feel exactly how I felt at their age, confused, frustrated, and believing they're somehow broken. I show them they're not broken, just different. And different can be powerful. Kimberly's eyes narrowed, her momentary shock replaced by the defensive anger I knew so well. This is ridiculous. You're playing victim as usual, and somehow you've convinced Jason to join your pity party. That's enough, my father said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. He wasn't speaking to me, but to Kimberly, perhaps for the first time. Your behavior tonight has been appalling. Kimberly looked at him in betrayal. Daddy? I think, my mother added quietly. We all have some serious reflection to do. The guests began to shift uncomfortably, some making discreet moves toward the exit. The beautiful engagement party had devolved into something raw and painful and undeniably real. Jason turned to me. Natalie, I'm sorry this happened this way. You deserved better, from all of us. Then he addressed the remaining guests one final time. I hope everyone here will consider how we speak about educators, about learning differences, about what constitutes success and value in our society. Because tonight, the person who demonstrated the most grace, resilience, and true success is the one who's been made to feel least worthy of recognition. With that, he walked calmly toward the exit. Kimberly, momentarily frozen in shock, suddenly unfroze and rushed after him, leaving her ring still glittering on the table. As guests began dispersing in awkward clusters, murmuring in stunned disbelief, my parents approached me hesitantly. Natalie, my mother began, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to say. Neither do I replied honestly. I think I need some time. And with that, I gathered my belongings and walked out into the cool evening air, feeling simultaneously shattered and strangely liberated. For the first time in my life, the truth of our family dynamic had been named aloud, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The morning after the engagement party, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the wreckage of emotions. My phone had been buzzing incessantly, concerned texts from distant relatives who'd witnessed the confrontation, gossip-seeking messages from Kimberly's friends, and a dozen missed calls from my parents. I couldn't bring myself to respond to any of them. Instead, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, watching raindrops race down the glass and trying to process everything that had happened. The public exposure of family dynamics we'd all pretended didn't exist. The shocking end of Kimberly and Jason's engagement. The uncomfortable truth that had been laid bare for everyone to see. A gentle knock at my door startled me from these thoughts. When I opened it, Jason stood there, looking as exhausted as I felt. I hope it's okay that I came by, he said. I wanted to make sure you were all right. I invited him in, oddly calm in his presence despite everything. Shouldn't I be asking you that question? You're the one who called off an engagement last night. It was coming for a while, he admitted, accepting the coffee I offered. Last night just crystallized what I'd been avoiding. Kimberly and I want fundamentally different things in life. We sat at my small kitchen table, the rain providing a soothing backdrop to our conversation. I didn't mean to cause such a scene, Jason said. But when she brought up that reading incident from your childhood, something just snapped. I couldn't be complicit anymore. No one's ever stood up for me like that, I said quietly. Not even me. That's the tragedy of it, he replied. You've been conditioned to accept treatment no one should have to endure. And I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. We talked for nearly 2 hours. About family dynamics and societal undervaluing of education, about his sister Rachel and my students, about the future and healing. As he was leaving, he hesitated at the door. This might be weird to ask, but my foundation is hosting an event next month for teachers implementing innovative approaches for students with learning differences. Would you consider speaking about your classroom methods? Despite everything, I found myself smiling. I'd like that. Later that afternoon, my parents arrived unannounced. Looking diminished somehow, my father without his usual commanding presence, my mother's eyes red-rimmed from crying. We need to talk, my father said, his voice lacking its typical authority. We sat awkwardly in my living room, the three of us trapped in patterns established decades ago yet suddenly unable to follow the familiar script. What Jason said last night. My father began haltingly. About how we've treated you. About your career. About your dyslexia. He stumbled over the word as though it were foreign. I want to say it's not true. But it is, my mother finished quietly. We've failed you, Natalie. Not just recently but consistently throughout your life. I sat in stunned silence. Never had I expected this acknowledgement. We were wrong, my father continued, looking directly at me perhaps for the first time in years. Wrong to measure success by such narrow standards. Wrong to treat your learning difference as a deficiency rather than just a difference. Wrong to act as though Kimberly's career choices were somehow more valuable than yours. Why? I asked. The question I'd wanted to ask my entire life. Why was it so important that we fit into these specific boxes? My parents exchanged glances laden with unspoken history. We thought we were preparing you both for success, my mother explained. My parents never pushed me academically, and I felt I had to fight twice as hard for every opportunity. I didn't want either of you to experience that struggle. And I, my father added reluctantly, was trying to live up to my own father's expectations through you girls. He never thought I was good enough, ambitious enough. I wanted to prove him wrong through my daughter's achievements. The honesty was as painful as it was healing. Generations of expectations and insecurities had been passed down, shaping our family in ways none of us had fully understood. We'd like to do better, my mother said tentatively. If you'll give us that chance. Before I could respond, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Kimberly, mascara smudged, designer clothes rumpled, looking nothing like her usual polished self. You, she hissed when she saw me. This is all your fault. My parents rose immediately. Kimberly, my father said firmly. That's enough. No, she cried. Jason broke off our engagement because of her. Because she's always playing the victim. Always making everyone feel sorry for her. Jason broke off your engagement because of your behavior. My mother corrected, her voice surprisingly steady. Because of values that don't align. And we're all partly responsible for enabling that behavior for years. Kimberly stared at our mother in betrayal. So you're taking her side now? After everything I've accomplished? After everything I've done to make this family proud? This isn't about sides. I said quietly. It's about recognizing that we've all been trapped in roles that aren't serving any of us. Easy for you to say, Kimberly spat. You've got everyone feeling sorry for poor little dyslexic Natalie now. Kimberly Wilson. My father's voice cracked like thunder. You will not speak to your sister that way. Not ever again. Kimberly collapsed onto my couch, sudden tears replacing her anger. Everything's falling apart, she sobbed. Jason won't return my calls. My friends are all gossiping. Even my boss heard about what happened. As I watched my typically invulnerable sister break down, something shifted inside me. Beneath her cruelty had always been insecurity. A desperate need to prove her worth through external validation. We were damaged in different ways by the same expectations. It doesn't have to be a competition, I said gently. It never did. The healing wasn't immediate or easy. In the weeks that followed, we had painful conversations that should have happened years earlier. Kimberly initially retreated to New York furious and humiliated, but gradually began therapy that helped her recognize patterns she'd inherited from our parents. My parents, true to their word, made efforts to understand my work. 6 months after the engagement party disaster, they visited my classroom for the first time, watching with growing wonder as I guided my second graders through a multisensory reading lesson. I had no idea, my father said afterward, his voice thick with emotion. The way you connected with that little boy who was struggling. It was remarkable. That's what I do every day, Dad. I replied simply. Kimberly and I established boundaries that had never existed before. Our relationship remained complicated, but the pretense was gone. When she finally apologized awkwardly, imperfectly but sincerely, I accepted it with the understanding that true change would take time. Jason and I maintained a friendship carefully kept platonic out of respect for the complicated circumstances that had connected us. His foundation became a valuable resource for my teaching, and eventually I developed a training program for other teachers working with learning differences. The most profound change happened within me. The Teacher of the Year award that arrived that spring was meaningful, but more significant was my growing confidence in the value of my work and my voice. I started a support group for educators with learning differences, sharing how our personal experiences enhanced rather than hindered our teaching. At the award ceremony, I looked out at the audience and saw my entire family, parents, Kimberly, even distant relatives, all genuinely applauding. Not out of obligation or politeness, but with real pride. I accept this award on behalf of every child who's ever felt different, every student who struggled to fit into traditional learning models, I said in my speech. Our differences aren't deficiencies, They're unique perspectives that enrich our classrooms and our world. Afterward, Kimberly approached somewhat tentatively. "Good speech," she said, without a hint of her old condescension. "You looked comfortable up there." "Thanks," I replied. "How's the new job going?" She had recently left corporate finance to work for a venture capital firm specializing in educational technology. A surprising but positive change. "Challenging," she admitted, "but good. Different." We weren't best friends, probably never would be, but we were finally sisters on more equal footing, each finding our own path rather than competing on the same narrow road. That evening, as I placed the award on my bookshelf, I thought about Jason's words from the engagement party. "You're the judge." For too long, I'd allowed others to judge my worth based on standards that never valued my unique contributions. I'd internalized their assessments, believing my differences made me less than. Now I understood the truth. We are all our own judges, determining what success means, what values matter, what lives we choose to create. My path wasn't lesser because it differed from my family's expectations. It was precisely right for who I am. If you've ever felt judged, diminished, or misunderstood by those who should support you most, remember that you have the power to reclaim your narrative. Your differences may be your greatest strengths. Your path doesn't need to mirror anyone else's to be valuable and meaningful. I'd love to hear your stories of standing up for yourself or finding your true worth. Have you ever had a moment when someone unexpected defended you? Or when you finally realized your own value despite others' judgments? Share in the comments below. Like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength through life's challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, in the end, you're the only judge who truly matters.